And I just turned 61 this year, so I don't like doing math. But I've been doing it basically for 20 some odd years. I've been a team leader. I've been a mega agent. Some of those little trophies, where's my finger, that you can see up along here. I've got about 17 top producer awards there. So in that 20 years, I've had a very successful career. I've been very blessed through that time. I've had a mega team, did it the wrong way. And I've had, right now, coming back to Keller Williams for the second time, I have a team that's running very successful. I'm much happier. They're much happier. I actually, in the year 2019, I was awarded Realtor of the Year for my local association. That's a very big honor. I was president of my local association in 2013. I'm actually the broker of a property management company as well. I'm currently a California Association of Realtors director. I sit on the investment housing committee. This year I got voted as a region chair, which I will serve in 2026. I'm also the manager of our KW office here in Lockford. And yes, I have ADHD. Okay. So I actually do some productivity coaching. And just so you guys know, this is my first time teaching this Ignite class, which I am so glad I get to teach it because we're talking about getting to the close. Right, so obviously I've had quite a few transactions. I love it when agents come to me and ask me questions about, this is going on, because for me, it's like putting a puzzle together. How can we get these puzzle pieces together? Because everybody wants to look at the puzzle when it's done, right? We want to frame it and shellac it and keep it there forever. So I'm going to dive right in. Enough about me. Enough of you are here. I'll keep admitting as you come in. I've already got my screen shared, so you guys should be able to see the first slide there. We're going to go over today. You guys have all gone through. We're on session 19, get to the close. So like you talked about lead generating, you've gone through follow-ups, capturing leads, all that kind of stuff. You finally made an offer and you got it accepted. Woohoo! And we're going to pretend today's the day you got it accepted, right? Have a fully executed contract. So now we want to get to the close. Because what happens when you get to the close? We get paid. Yay! Finally, after all that work, it all pays off. So before we begin and get into it, I'd like to hear from some of you, as some of you are still coming in. If you can let me know, anybody want to share any progress that they have found? We're on session, what is it? 19. So have any of you guys found any successes from what you've learned so far? Just unmute yourself if you do. Alex is thinking about it. No one want to share? Nobody have anything that they've learned that they put into practice from Ignite?
Yes,
I've learned. Oh,
Either one.
my name is Genevia Early. I've learned that the things that I didn't know when I started out, I'm more comfortable now, and there's various words that are said, and it triggers what was said in Ignite. And so I find myself just really just talking to anybody every time. And so I feel real good about the class. So as it goes further, we just get better.
Isn't it funny how when you hear things and you hear it, and then you'll hear it in the office and you'll even read it, or you'll listen to a podcast or have one of your team meetings or any of those kind of things, and or hearing this, and then all of a sudden the dots get connected, right? Where something that sounded like foreign, or you just thought, yeah, or like for me, it's yeah. And then it connects, and there's nothing about that. And that's one of those beautiful things, you guys, keep in mind. Once you do that, once you make that connection, you can't unremember it. Right? So let that sink in. You're not going to unremember it. You may have a harder time drawing back on some of it, but once you make that connection, exactly like you were talking about, Geneva, you don't unknow it. Okay, so that's
One
awesome.
thing about lead generation,
Mm-hmm,
I saw the bigger picture in lead generation because we
mm-hmm,
say it all
mm-hmm.
the time. It's just making a connection with humans. And it's
Oh.
just how humans think, you know. So you once you get that connection, it just comes kind of like automatically. So that's something I picked up that it was already there. Now I think that it'll go further.
My uncle was someone I looked up to a lot. My family came from, basically my mom was born in a home with no electricity and no running water, right? So they're very humble beginnings. And he became very successful. He went into the Navy, and after he got out, he decided, I like making a couple dollars. And one of the things he taught me was, Sherry, just make a friend. That's all you have to do. Just like you're talking about, Geneva, like talking to humans and stuff. Sometimes we make things so complicated, and it really goes down to the basic of just make a friends. Make a friends. Use better English than me, but make a friend. Okay. So that's the whole purpose of it. A lot of times, sometimes even I, over the years, have gotten drawn into trying to push too hard instead of just going back to the relationship of just make a friend. That's all I have to do. Awesome. Whoop. So is somebody willing to unmute themselves and read this page? It's important why they put it on here as a whole page.
Real estate transactions aren't particularly trouble-free. It's a strenuous and trying time that requires all the attention and effort you can command.
Yes, it does. Amen to that. So I want you guys, I want to ask you, like, what's important about this process? It's strenuous, it's trying, it requires all of our attention and effort that we can command. And we have to go back to why. The why is two reasons. It's because the client gets what they want and you get paid. That's it succinctly, right? Why do all this? It's so that your client can get what they want and you can get paid. And it's a beautiful thing when they both happen. So today on the agenda, we're going to talk about timelines, like once an offer gets accepted. Just getting a lead doesn't, like you've learned, doesn't make them necessarily your client. Just because you get under contract doesn't mean they're going to get what they want and you get paid, right? So there's a lot that happens during this. I heard a really great thing just recently. They talked about how, do you guys know that the general public, when we're talking about these buyer broker agreements and how buyers agents are going to get paid in the future, near future, very near future, like in the next couple months, but they talked about what the general public thinks. The general public thinks a buyer's agent spends like 10 hours or less through that home buying process. And of course, as an agent, we're like, what? It's more like the actual timeline is more like 40 plus hours, depending on how long you've been driving them around. Like, and for some agents now with so few homes on the market, if you're looking at a month or more of trying to find that, oh my God, I just closed one last week that I worked with that person a year and a half. And then there was different reasons, right? They weren't like ready to go and do that kind of stuff, but it was a year and a half process. There's another one we're about ready to get in contract that's for 10 years. They were part of my geographical farm. They're just now going in. So it's like, that's not 40 hours. So just so you know, the general public has a very different opinion of what we do. And when we get to the trend, they say 5% of the transaction is getting you into contract. Now, once you're in contract, here's where the rubber meets the road. And so this is where I really want to help you guys to hone your skill, to get a better understanding of what it is. Because I know the more confident I can make you feel about this, you're going to relay that to your client because they're going to be scared, right? In California, our prices are ridiculous. A first-time home buyer is looking between a $500,000 to a $600,000 home, a $500,000 home. That's huge. That's not a gallon of milk or, that's not even a car. $500,000, right? It's a huge investment. So you think they're going to have some sleepless nights? You think they're going to be a little sweaty and, be a little nervous and maybe not quite as nice as they might normally be because they're going to be under a lot of stress? But the more confident you can be and that you can walk them through this process, the much easier time they're going to have, which in turn you're going to have, right? Because there's nothing like having a client that's just a big worry wart, that all they do is want to scream and cry or, you know, just be scared, shrivel up in a corner, right? It's much easier when you can have them, when you can explain the process to them so that they can understand, and then they can make the best decision for them, okay? So one of the big things that we can do in this process is to communicate. And if you guys remember what the Y, I have to look at it, the Y4C2Ts, I can never say that right. The Y4C2Ts, that's the win-win, integrity, customers, communication, creativity, teamwork, trust, equity, success. That's what those Y4C2Ts is. So there's a reason why communication is in there. That's one of the most important things. Well, they're all important, but that's why it's in there. So we're going to go over that communication part of it. Okay. So if you guys have your participants guide, we actually, it's on page 289. It looks like this. Well, you can't see it in there. Okay. So you may want to open it up because they have a sample timeline in there, and you actually may want to use this. I highly suggest that you create your own template. I actually have mine in like a little Excel box that has my timelines, because we're all going to use the same contract, right? Right, in your state has a contract. So you're not going to use a different contract for different things, right? I mean, unless you're doing land or residential or commercial, that's not the point I'm making. The point is, know your contract. So your contract's going to have the same kind of timelines. It's going to talk about an earnest money. It's going to talk about inspection timeframes. It's going to talk about loan timeframes. It's going to talk about definitions. It's going to talk about all that kind of stuff. Like California has a, 19-page contract. I think Arizona, I just heard from somebody, you guys have 4. Our listing agreement is like 7 to 10. Yours is 1. We say, God, I wish it was 1. But it's like, yeah, somebody sued somebody, so we added another page. And California people like to sue, so we've got a lot of pages. So if you want to turn to your participants guide, there's like and we're going to kind of go over some of those here too. Okay. So in this book, it kind of said you can use one of the contracts from your previous classes, but I'm going to assume that not all of you have been on every class and don't have it. So we're going to go on. There we go. Just a generic time frame. Okay, that today's the day, June the 24th, on Monday, you got your offer accepted. That's going to be our timeline for this class. Okay, so it's a Monday. It's going to make counting out our days easier. So I'm going to, because I don't know which state a lot of you are from. There's several states that everybody's representing here. I don't know those contracts like I know California's, right? So in California, most contracts are written for 30 days. And we have a 17-day inspection period. So I put the dates you see on there are for our contract dates, which are inspection time frame. And 2 years ago, the California Association of Realtors put together the inspection, the appraisal, and the loan contingencies. They used to have different dates. Now they're all 17. Easy to remember, right? Harder to accomplish when you're working with a lender, but it's certainly easier to remember. So in this case, we have a contract that began on June the 24th, which means it's going to close, as I counted the days out, July the 24th. Now, don't just assume that when you're counting those days, it's just the next month over at that day, because some months have 31 days and some months have less than 30. And if it's a leap year, so count out the days, okay? Whose responsibility is that to count those out?
Hours.
Agent.
I mean, wouldn't you think they're paying you some big bucks to represent them? You wrote the contract for them. They would think that you would know it, and you're going to be holding their hand through the process. So in the contract, you have to know there are some that are calendar days. There are some that are business days. in the contract in California, it talks about had the closing on July the 24th. It's a Wednesday, and there's a reason why I put the day on this as well, is because if it's falls on a Saturday, you can't close an escrow in California on a Saturday because our recorder's office isn't open. So your contract can't be made to close on a day that can't happen, right? That's a perpetuating, can't happen. So what they say is you're going to count forward. So if you have a closing where your days count out and it's ending on a Saturday, in California, we're going to get a count out to the following Monday. Unless that Monday's a holiday, which there's a lot of Monday holidays, then it would fall on the following. So you have to think of the next day that the county recorder's office could be there, that they could do business. Okay, so think of it that way. It absolutely is. You count out the numerical days, but you can't end on a day that you cannot perform, right? That neither your buyer or your seller can perform, which would, you can't record on a Saturday or Sunday when the county recorder's office is not open. If you're using attorneys, it's the same thing. If it, do attorneys work on Saturdays? No. Yeah, or Sundays. So you can't make your contract end in a day when it's impossible to perform. Okay, so that's why I kind of put these connecting dates with it. Our starting date is on, can your starting date be on a Sunday?
No.
Shake your head. Yes. Yes. It's because the starting date is when it became fully executed. Okay, so when you have, and sometimes, hey, realtors work late at night. It could have been 10 o'clock last night that this contract got accepted. Now, in this case, I put it for today. But if it was signed on Saturday, or if it was signed by everybody on Saturday or Sunday, that's absolutely your start date. So then you have to look at all the different timeframes that we have, and we're going to go over a lot of them to see if that, nothing's going to change the start date, but it has an effect on what those next days are after that. Does that make sense?
Sense.
Yep. Okay. So first we want to look at, yes, we've got a lot of time frames in the contract, and you definitely, after today, you're going to get an idea of what some of those are, but it doesn't mean it's all inclusive, because I'm not going by the contract line by line by line. I tell all of my new agents, what's the biggest tool in a realtor's toolbox? There's two of them. One is our Metro List to be able to find where are the homes for sale. And the second one is, where are you going to get those forms? Like when you want to write a contract, right? So we have zip forms, wind forms, Lone Wolf. People have different access points in your state. Could be your brokerage, but is it a paper sack? Like where are you going to write know your contracts, right? So know where they are. So that's a big tool in the tool belt. Because remember, if you don't have it in writing, it's make-believe. And we don't operate in fairy dust. So we're not going with make-believe, because I don't want to have make-believe money. I want to make the Benjamins, right? So I'm going to know my purchase contract. I'm going to know my listing agreement. I'm going to know where to get them. And I'm going to know what the timeframes are, that there are timeframes in it. Okay. So when we look at all that, we want to look at who's involved in the transaction. So I want you guys to, this is in your participants guide. It's on page 19.5. So it is now looking at who's involved in the transaction. There's definitely you and the buyer, right? Because right now we're talking about a buyer. We got an offer accepted that we wrote. So now there's a buyer. Well, there's a listing agent, or some people call it a co-op agent. It's the agent for the other side, right? You're not going to be dealing with the seller because it's unethical to talk to a seller directly when they're represented by another agent. So you're not going to talk to them, but you're going to talk to their agent or their representative, right? We're going to have escrow. Escrow is a neutral third person that handles this. You're going to have a title. Sometimes that title and escrow is the same person. Sometimes it's another. You're going to have an appraiser. If it's not cash and they're not going to get and the buyer that's paying cash doesn't want to have it appraised, you're more than likely going to be communicating with the appraiser. And if your buyer's not paying cash, they're going to have a lender. So a lender's going to be involved. If a buyer's getting a loan, they're going to have insurance on the home. So you're going to be talking and making sure that they've got homeowners insurance. If the home has a tenant in it, you may be dealing with a property manager. And God help you if it's a tenant you're dealing with. You might be dealing with movers to help your buyer, right? To kind of help coordinate that. That's white glove service to do that. You may have contractors because maybe there's some repairs that they're doing. And then there is the inevitable family member. Every buyer's got one. It's that, I don't care if it's their mother, their brother, their uncle, their father. Dads are big. Now, I always look at it as, that's a good father because they're looking out for their children, right? Or a mother, right? Either one of those two. I give them a lot of grace because same thing, husbands, wives, right? That means they're protectors. And if you look at that, right? Change the way you look at things, the way you look at things change. So if you look at them as these are their protectors. Now, they don't know what you know. Do they eat, drink, sleep, real estate like you do?
No.
Let me tell you, no, there's no way they do that like I do. Right? I mean, I'm doing this 24/7, right? And especially if you're a new agent, you're probably doing the same thing. So there's no way that Aunt Betty has the 20 years experience and the hundreds of transactions that I've had, right? Now, I'm not saying she's not going to be able to give them advice, but it's certainly not going to be the same. So, like I said, be prepared for those family members, like it or not. One of the last showings that we had when the buyer got into contract and they went into the home and they wanted to go through it one more time. And this is before even their inspections. Okay, so we set it up for them. They brought 28 family members with them. 28. Oh my goodness. It was I've never seen anything like it. It was, now that I never had that happen before. So now I've learned something from that. So now whenever I talk to my client about coming back, and if they want to bring somebody, I question them a little bit more about that, because there's some things I thought were kind of like just assumed. And I thought, that was foolish me. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, so first we want to go and look at, okay, so now we're talking about a buyer. So we've got the buyer up at the top that you see, the orange buyer and the yellow seller. We're talking about the buyer right now. So what is the first thing? These are things you want to think of, right? And that you're going to put on your timeline. What does my buyer need? What do they need?
Pre-qual.
They do, right? And in some states, they had to have it already. So you have a pre-qual, which means you have an offer that the lender needs to see. So looking at what are the first things my buyer needs, right? And every escrow is different, just to let you know. Don't think that this is black and white. Now, some of it's universal, because if the buyer's getting a loan, there's going to be a lender. And if they're getting a loan, there's going to be an appraisal, unless they do a desktop, but it's still somebody doing it, right? Whether they drove by and went into the home, or the lender allowed them to do a desktop appraisal. Okay, desktop appraisal means they don't physically have to go to the property to inspect it. They can just look at comps. Okay, so we want to look at what do the buyers need to know and do. That's a part of our fiduciary responsibility, because fiduciary, usually when you start to use that word, it means there's money involved, which means somebody's paying me for something, and it's more than just my opinion. My fiduciary responsibility is to guess at what they don't know. Right? So you have to operate under the assumption they don't eat, drink, sleep, live real estate like you do. They don't know. Right? And so the more you can tell them and help them along, the better you are at fulfilling your fiduciary responsibility. Okay. And let me tell you, there is nothing like letting the air out of a big hot balloon as when you start to explain to your buyer what's normal. Because they're either getting their what's normal from the news or Aunt Betty, which, like I was saying earlier, like, how good do you think that is? If Aunt Betty bought her home 20 years ago, do you think the transaction's different 20 years ago? I bet the contract then was on one page. And in California, like I said, it's 17 now. There's no way it was the same. Right? So the other thing you want to ask, what do you need to know? We're not talking about, do you need to know your contract? Because we're already operating under that assumption. You already need to know your contract. But what do you need to know? Do you need to know more about septics if there's a septic on the property? Do you need to know more about chimneys if there's chimneys? Do you need to know more about the air quality control in San Joaquin County, where I'm from? you know, there's pretty much you can't burn anytime, right? Same thing with water rights, things like that. Whether you can, if you're in a drier area, if there's certain days you can water or not, what do you need to know? Okay, either about your client, about their lender, about the escrow, about the inspections. There's so much in that you want to ask yourself, what in this transaction for this person, what do I need to know? What does the rest of the team need to know or take action on? And that's kind of what we went over earlier when you guys said, whoever it was that said the pre-qual. So you have a contract. How's that lender going to know that you have a fully executed contract? I had a new agent ask me just today about a signing, and they're like, who schedules that? And I said, well, escrow does, but you never take your hand off the wheel, and you can't just go, well, that's not my job. You don't, you can't say that. You've got to keep your hands on the wheel. And yes, that's somebody else to do that, right? But you've still got to coordinate that and make sure that that happens. They have a lender. It's up to you to make sure that your buyer's agent, your buyer's lender got a copy of that contract. Otherwise, you're going to lose precious days in the contract. They're not going to be working on it. And I guarantee you, they're going to be the one holding it up. So as soon as you get a contract accepted, you need to look at, who do I need to send this to? Okay. What am I doing at the point? What am I doing to bulletproof this transaction and set myself up for success? If you know that you have a client that has somebody in their ear constantly about it's the worst time to buy, you've overpaid, you've done, you know, depending on what you're hearing from your client, you might want to look at that. I might want to bulletproof my transaction and make sure that if somebody's talking to them and causing my buyer to have doubt on the that maybe they've overpaid for this contract that we're in, then I'm going to need to send them a market analysis, right? I'm going to look at that and I'm going to respond to that, because I want my buyer to feel good about this. And I have to say, you know, I also have a degree in Christian counseling, right? It's just a BA, but I really love the psychology of it, right? So I tell people going into this, buying a house, getting divorced, getting married, having a baby, there's these big life events. Buying a house is one of them. I can't make it stress-free. It's gonna be stressful, but I can minimize that amount of stress, right? So lean on me, or when I'm telling you about these certain things, or sometimes when you think I'm going on and on, it's because I'm trying to reassure you, or I'm trying to educate you and letting you know what's normal and what's not, because I don't want you to be so stressed. I know that you are, and just so you know, I'm not a fairy queen either that can just sprinkle pixie dust over you and say, you know, bibbity bobbity boo, don't be stressed. If you are, you're going to be. But I know that there's things that I can do to help tell you what's normal. And then you'll know, oh, that's normal. I didn't know that was normal. You know,
Sherry?
yes.
Could you let me into the Zoom on my computer? I just got home.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yep. There were 3 people waiting. Thank you. So there's 29 of you here now. So looking at how am I going to bulletproof this transaction? Again, don't think that it's black and white, because it's not, because every transaction is different. Okay. Go through this. So here we go with our timeline. Okay, so we want to look out the basic timeline, right? You have your beginning date. You have a date that an earnest money deposit is going to be turned in. You have your inspection timeframes. You have a walkthrough when the appraisal. Now, these are all plotted out differently. And like I said, in California, it's all 17 days. So that top timeline that kind of spreads it out isn't quite the same as, but in your state, it might be different. So you need to look at those timelines. Pull out a blank contract and look at it. Or ask someone in your office, hey, could you tell me what the basic timelines are, or where I can find them in the contract if you don't know? And don't be afraid to ask. So I'm going to go over what I know, which is here in California. Okay, so forgive me. And that is, in our contract, the earnest money deposit is due within 3 days of the acceptance. So I wrote on there the 27th. Now, again, That day is a business day. All the other days in the contract are calendar days. And they do that, it's 3 business days to get your earnest money deposit to escrow. Because again, escrow's not open on the weekends. So let's just say, for instance, if our offer was accepted on Friday, last Friday, get my phone here so I can look at it. What was the date last Friday? It would be July the 21st. So if the earnest money deposit, if it was fully executed on July the 21st, Friday, July the 21st, the earnest money deposit would be due in 3 days. That's the time frame. We don't count Saturday. We don't count Sunday. So we would start counting on Monday. So Monday is day 1, because that's 24 hours from the day it got accepted. Tuesday, the 25th would be day 2, and the 26th would be the 3rd day. So just like in my example here, had the offer been accepted today, the 27th, it's the same date. Okay. So keep in mind that first 3 days is business days. Okay? The rest of them we're going to count out like calendar days, but then be mindful that they're not going to fall on Saturdays or Sundays, days you can't perform on. Okay. So if we counted out 17 days, we've got till July the 11th to get our inspections done for this client. Okay. Remember when they're saying, and then we want to look at, now you're gonna have to check with your broker, but most say between 3 to 5 days before the close, they're wanting the buyers to go through to do a final walkthrough. Okay. So I want you guys to hear this. What's a walkthrough? Anybody have an idea what a walkthrough is?
Where they walk through and just make sure that everything is as it's supposed to be, that the refrigerator's still there, that if it's supposed to be, the washer and
Yeah.
dryer's still there, if it's supposed to be.
Yep, no windows are broken, no holes in the wall, the lawn's not 3 feet high. Basically, the walkthrough is to verify that the home is in the same condition as when they made their offer. And that's only fair, right? So it's in the contract. And that was the seller's contractual obligation, is to maintain that home. So I want you guys to think about something, okay? So we talked earlier about bulletproofing a transaction. Let's just say you're representing a seller instead of a buyer. And your seller's already talked about, oh, it's hot out, and I don't want to water, and I can't afford my water bill, so I'm just not going to water. And, I don't mow my lawn, and I'm not going to pay for that stuff because I'm just not gonna. And so then you see that the lawn's getting yellow and green, or yellow and dying, and it's not growing, it's just going to be dead. So to bulletproof the transaction, you may want to make sure that if you hear some of those things, the seller's not going to put together the fact that buried in that 17-page document is their contractual obligation to keep the home in the same condition. They're thinking about their bills. They're at that stress level, right? They're thinking about, oh my God, I'm finally going to get out from under this, or I'm finally going to, my divorce is finally going to be final, or whatever the reason is for them selling. So it's one of your things to bulletproof it, is to listen for things like that. So you can tell them, remember, I understand what you're saying. And yes, I know it's a pain, and especially if it's hotter, and yes, it's more expensive for the water, but our obligation is to keep the home in the same condition. So if the grass was green when they made the offer, you certainly don't want to lose all this in the last day because the grass is yellow, or then you have to pay so much to get it back green again, right? So talk them through that part, okay? Same thing with the appraisal. If you know that your deadline is July the 11th and it's July the 10th and nobody's called you to tell you about scheduling the appraisal, is that a good time to be following up with the lender?
Yes.
Not on July the 10th. You got one more day. So think about that. If the deadline is on the 11th for like the loan and the appraisal, start talking to them about 5 days before, if you haven't heard that the appraisal's in, right? So you want to think about that ahead of time. That's bulletproofing your transaction. So on your timeline, you might want to write like, yes, the appraisal inspection or contingency is due on the 17th, but maybe on the 15th, you might want to be checking in. Because sometimes the appraisers call the listing agent, they don't call you, because the lender's going to tell them whoever they're told. And if they're not told who to call, normally they'll call the listing agent. So if you don't specifically say, that's one thing I do to my lenders, I'll say, have them call me, because I'm a control freak. I want to be in control. I want to know who the appraisal is. I want to have their phone number. I want to be able to talk to them. If there's any problems, I want to be able to call them back. And because I want to know when they're scheduled. And then because they're calling me, it's my obligation to get them into the home, which I don't mind doing that because I want that control, because that's me helping my buyer, right? But if they don't call me and it's day 15, 16, 17, I'm starting to sweat and the lender isn't talking to me, I'm stressing, right? Because I want to know that yes, they got in, because it takes an appraiser a couple days to finish their job. Once they get in, doesn't mean that their appraisal is done and is off to the lender. It has to be done, written up, got all their specs to it, goes to the lender, then the lender reviews it, and then they put the report out. Did it come in at value with no conditions? Did it come in under value? Are we negotiating? Did it come in over value and you get to prove, Dad, Betty, you know what you're doing? So depending on like where it is, right? And if any of you are called Betty, I am sorry. Okay, don't take it personal. Okay, is any of that, I'm hoping that's making sense. Okay, so we're talking about common interaction points, okay? There's communication deadlines, right? There's communication of contract to other parties such as title and lending, right? So they're actually listed in the contract. So you're going to definitely be communicating with them. There's lender and buyer communication. You want to make sure, oh my God, last month I had a client who was yelling at their lender. Actually, it was a new agent of ours in the office, and she's translating for them, and she's having to be in the middle of this with her buyer yelling at the lender. They did not have a good relationship. Now, it ended up to a good close, but man, that was a tight situation for her to be in. So obviously, whatever we need to do, we're going to do to help streamline or make sure that that communication is flowing freely back and forth. And the other thing, the advice I gave to this agent, I said, look, this is the first time this buyer is going through that. So when that lender asks for their pay stubs again and their bank statements again, and that buyer's like, I already gave it to them and they just keep doing it. You know, they're just upset because remember, they're stressed. So things don't come out like, oh, you know, that sweet little girl, you know, she just asked for that again. And I think I'm just going to do it. That's not how they answer. They're like, I already gave it to him. And they just keep asking for it. I don't know what they're doing with it. Now it's my personal information that's going on. You know, that's kind of how it comes out. Now, most of the time I have to say, you guys are going to get something in between those two. Okay. So, but you need to know how to handle it when it's coming at you that strong and hard and not take it personal. It's not you. You're just there to help the stressed person go mitigate through this process. Okay. And so if you can tell them, hey, it's normal, and don't be surprised. Like if you get your bank statement, keep it. You know, make sure that you're in contact with your HR department. Make sure your HR department doesn't have somebody that just went on vacation and there's nobody else that's going to be able to verify your employment. So this is where now as a real estate agent, I'm learning lending things. But if 80% of the transactions are loans, I'm going to need to know something about loans, right? All the transactions are going to have title and escrow. So I'm going to need to know a little bit about title. Not that I'm going to give title advice to a client, but I'm going to need to know about it. Okay. So you're going to need to know how to schedule. And when you schedule, let's just say your buyer chooses to have a pest inspection, you're going to need to know how they're getting in. Right? Again, there's no magic pixie dust stuff. And let me tell you, depending on who the other agent is, they're going to be a very cooperative agent. And usually that's a relationship that you want to work with. And that's actually the relationship you want to emulate as well, right? So you're going to do no matter what. But there are some agents that are lazy, and there's some that you end up doing some of their job. Okay. And you can't expect a listing agent or a seller to let your pest person in or how the roof person goes in. or how the home inspector goes in, right? That's your job. So you need to make sure when you're scheduling, let's just say you scheduled it on July the 3rd, if you're going to a family picnic, then make sure that you don't do something like that to where you're not going to be able to be there to let them in. It's your job, not your buyer. Okay. The other things you're going to want to watch over is to make sure that you're sending amendments or the inspection reports and things like that to the title company. One thing I want to reiterate with this is it says and lending. And yes, there are documents that we need to send to the lender, but I want you guys to remember who your fiduciary responsibility is to. It's to your buyer. Whatever is in their best interest, that's what we do. Okay. So there's additional questions you might want to ask yourself. When am I reminding the buyer to not make a big purchase? And I'm going to tell you guys several times, right? Because one of the big reasons why loans don't go through, I've heard horror stories because the buyer gets in contract, and then they go out and they start thinking of, oh, that beautiful living room, you know, and then they'll go to a furniture store and they'll get that new couch so they can have it ready when it closes and they can move in. Well, when they went to go get that couch, they decided to go ahead and charge it because they were saving their money for their down payment. Well, now that extra purchase just threw off their income to debt ratio. Now you're sunk. Or they went to that furniture store and they pulled their credit. And then that messed up their credit score, right? So you want to be making sure that you're talking to your buyer several times, and please don't just assume that because you told them once, that's it, right? Like if any of you have children, you didn't just tell them once how to say please and thank you. For some, it takes a lifetime, right? Or some it's harder, some learn easier, but just don't assume that it's one and done. It's not. And there's so many other things on that buyer's mind, this huge purchase, and how am I going to make those end meet? And are all my savings are depleted now? I mean, that's an emotional kind of thing, right? So all this stuff is going on. And then if you got a family member that are either being supportive or not supportive, or like my one client last week said, you know, my dad's just not going to be happy. I'm going to quit bringing him. You know, he's just going to tell me how hard this is. Why are you buying in the country? You're not going to be able to take care of it. But it's this client's dream to do it, right? So he's like, yeah, I'm not bringing dad in. Okay, so along some of these, am I communicating notices to holidays? Like right now, 4th of July is just around the corner. Is that going to mess up any of my dates? Right? Is somebody going out of town? And if somebody is, do they have somebody in their place? Right? How do I negotiate the inspection reports? And when am I communicating this? Okay, and let me tell you from both sides, okay? So you can imagine, right? I've done a lot of transactions. I've been on the listing side and I hate it. And I know all the other listing agents do too. And when you get your listing, you will hate this too. If you go along to day 17 in your inspection time frame and all of a sudden an email pops over and it's this huge request for repairs with like the roof and, you know, all this, the hot water heater pressure relief valve is a safety issue, and there's no light switch by the back door stoop. That's a health and safety issue that you have to fix. And, you know, just lambast the agent with every little thing and then just send that in and never call and never communicate at all. Just email it over. Would that sit well with you? No, because you got to think, and this is what I tell all my agents, like, if your buyer asks you to do something crazy, you're going to have to do your best to do something crazy, right? If they want to ask for some ridiculous stuff, you're going to have to present that way, because your fiduciary duty is not what you think, it's to represent your client. And I've had some doozies of things that buyers have asked of sellers, right? So you're going to have to go and talk to that agent. And most of the time, if you can talk to the agent and get them to understand where your buyer came from and why these are concerns, not just that they're a tightwad, because guess how easy it is to say no to a tightwad, right? Pretty easy, isn't it? Right? A tightwad, white piece of paper, real easy to say no to. But one of the other things my uncle told me, which was just make a friend, Sherry, it's actually hard to say no to a person's face. So you want to try to make it as personal as possible. So it's not just a piece of paper, right? So you want to explain to them why. Now, sometimes it's real hard to come up with a reason why if somebody's being unreasonable. But even that, you can say, hey, I know he's being unreasonable. Please just, hear me out. Here's the this, here's the that, maybe you can have your seller consider this. And then you've got to come up with some reason of why it might be in their best interest, right? Like, hey, instead of putting the home back on the market, let's just, if we can get through this little hurdle, we'll be done in 2 weeks. Your seller doesn't have to go back on the market. They don't have to start showing again. They don't have to go through all that. So is it a win-win for them? If it's not, then it's not. And you part your ways and you have a cancellation. But if you can work with that agent and help them to understand why your client is asking for the things that they are, if you get their cooperation, who's talking to the seller? That's what you've got to think of. Who's telling them that? I'm working with some really good agents in an escrow process, which is just a dream. And it's so nice to work with them, even when our clients are being unreasonable. But I've got another one I'm working on. And oh my gosh, this agent is such a hothead. Like I can't say nothing to him that he's not going off the deep end. And so I'm constantly trying to bring him back, bring him into clarity. Let's come back to this, and so I'm constantly doing that with him because I know if I can get him to understand, he's the one that's going to be explaining to his client, right? So the better I can get more people on my side, the better chance my buyer is going to get what they want. Does that make sense? Because I hope it makes sense. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about document points. Okay, so when we get a pest inspection back, or when we get a preliminary title report, we're going to be getting some of these communication documents. If we get something for the seller disclosures from the other side, you have to ask yourself, excuse me, to whom and from whom is this document coming and going? Like it's easy to see who it's coming from. Where's it going? Because it doesn't stay in your pocket. Better not stay in your inbox, right? Or somebody's not doing their job. So one says, I better start checking my inbox every day if that's where they're coming, because more than likely they're going to email it to you, because we rarely hand paper copies to anybody anymore. They're certainly not going to be texting it. So it's going to come with email. So you better be checking your inbox every day. And when you get it, you have to ask yourself, who do I need to send this to? Because it's not ever going to just sit with you, ever. Okay. So you have to look at is it going to escrow? If I have a transaction coordinator, do I need to send it to them? Am I going to upload it to the command website? Am I sending it to my buyer? If I'm representing a buyer, just about, I don't know what I would ever get that I wouldn't be sending to the buyer. So that's the first one that's going to be right there. Okay. What's the plan to follow up? If I've sent something to somebody and they haven't responded, what am I going to do? Just say, well, I sent it to them. Guess my job is done. Right? No way. And certainly we have better, I kind of think that's kind of a no-brainer too, right? Like whose job is that? Certainly not your buyer's job to follow up with it and just to remind you, hey, did that appraisal come in? So putting things on your timeline, and what I go beyond putting it on my timeline, I actually get my phone out and I put it on my calendar. At the very top of the day, I put the address, and I'm telling you this is a pro tip, okay? If you get used to labeling everything, whether you're sending an email or you're labeling something, it's always the property address and then what it is. 123 First Street appraisal. 123 First Street pest inspection. 123 First Street inspection contingency deadline. 123 First Street's this, because I want you to operate like a top producer, right? So imagine, taking care of one escrow is not that hard. Now, your first one, yes. Your second one, third one's getting easier, okay? But on your fourth or fifth one, handling one is not hard. But I don't want you to work like you're handling one. I want you to work like you're handling 6. So can you imagine handling 6? So imagine handling 6 escrows. That's what I want you to look at. So when you're communicating and when you're putting things in your calendar, get used to putting them as that date, as the property address, right? And then what it is. And so when I was working with my team, I had 6 other people on my team. They were doing deals, plus I was doing deals. And I told them, you cannot over communicate with me, but boy, howdy, you can sure under communicate with me. And that's not going to be good for either of us, right? It's just not. Like you're leaving me out. And it's my team, it's my client. Don't do that, right? So you can't over communicate with me. And that's one way how I was able to talk about multitask. I could easily go through my inbox and just quickly look at it and see sorry about that. What things needed to be addressed, and then I could file them away accordingly as I went down through it. That's another thing of talking about other templates. Right now, we've given you in the packet a timeline. That's kind of a template that you can use to go through. Because remember, we talked about the contract's gonna have timelines on it. They're gonna be pretty much the same. So, sorry, I have to keep letting some people into the room. Any questions so far or ahas? Anybody? Nobody? I get to just keep talking then. Okay,
So
so
I have a
here we're,
question.
yes,
So it's kind of based on your timeline there. Due diligence, right? The inspection period.
mhm.
That actually, I just want to make sure that it actually starts at contract acceptance or offer acceptance or whatever.
Yes, you have to remember contract law is there has to be a beginning and an end date. So there's a beginning date. That's when it's fully executed. So in this contract, it's June the 24th on a Monday was when it was fully executed. And so if you have your due diligence in your state, maybe it's, well, even with that, our typical contract is 17 days. But for us, because right now we have multiple offers coming in, we're shortening the buyer's inspection timeframes to 10 days. Or that's kind of common right now. There's times 2 years ago when we were doing them in 5 days, right? So you're going to count that day, whatever your contract day is what you're going to count from that day one. So in this case, it would be June the 24th. Brian, can you tell me in your area, what is your normal inspection timeframe or your due diligence?
I think it's 10 days.
10, okay. So in this case, you would just count out the 10 days. So let's do that. I'm gonna take my calendar out here and I'm gonna look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, this is really a good example. Okay. So in this case, 10 days from June the 24th is going to be July the 4th. So most contracts are going to read that if you can't, if things are closed, you have to go to the next business day if it falls on a holiday. Now, like I said, California contracts specifies holidays, legal federal holidays, weekends, that kind of stuff. So in this case, it would go to July the 5th. But I would want to make sure, because you're in Arizona, you're not California. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any other questions on that? We are moving right along. So now we're going to talk about working with a seller, and I've kind of jumped back and forth a little bit previously. So we're going to focus more now on sellers. So in a seller's transaction, there's more who are involved than just you and the seller, right? So some loud motorcycles just went by. So you want to ask yourself the same thing. Of course, there's going to be many people involved in this transaction, so you want to ask yourself, who are they? Okay, so in this one right now, I want you guys, I need to have 5 people. Who are we going to be? So I'm not going to break you up into small groups, okay? But in order to go around that and see that you still are participating and that you're understanding and that you're getting this, is I want to ask you, I need 5 different people to tell me 5 different individuals who are going to be involved in a seller transaction.
Appraiser?
Appraiser's one, very good.
The lender,
Lender,
Inspector.
very good.
Title,
That's. Go ahead.
Title agent,
Title, very good. So appraiser, an inspector, a lender, and the title, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 4, right?
Agent,
The agent, yeah, and you're meaning the buyer's agent.
the buyers and listing.
Yep. Right, because you're working with a seller, you're the listing agent. So you're gonna be dealing with the buyer's agent. Okay. Which it gets so confusing because some people call them the selling agent. And as soon as you say the selling agent, it's like, well, I'm the seller's agent. I'm talking to the selling agent. Right? It's just like, I don't know why we use that, but we do. So I try to separate it with the buyer's agent, right? It makes it pretty clear who that person is. I'm working with the seller, the other person's working with the buyer. And I'm definitely going to be communicating with them, right? And even though my seller is not getting the loan, this is one of those things where I tell you, don't take your hands off the wheel in this transaction. So even though you're working with a seller and there's a loan, the buyer's getting a loan, don't just assume that the buyer's agent sent that lender the contract. And if the buyer's lender doesn't get a copy of the contract, they're sitting on their hands and doing nothing. There's nothing for them to do till they get the contract. So they know what the terms are, how much, what are the timelines. They need a copy of it. So it's one of those things, don't overstep your bounds, right? And send the contract to the, well, I've done that too, but you don't want to offend somebody, but you may want to ask, like on day 2, when escrow's opened and the contract's opened, you may want to ask the other agent, hey, were you able to send the lender the contract, or would you like me to? Happy to help. Right? There's nothing wrong. Would you be offended if I sent that to you? If you were representing the buyer and I was representing the seller, and you already know I'm a know-it-all, right? And just assume that, hey, would you mind if I sent, let me know if you sent the lender the contract?
Well, no, you shouldn't be upset or anything. It's normal. You should send it.
Usually that's a cue for you, right? If somebody gets upset when you ask them something like that, that means that they're not confident, right? And they're covering over something. So that kind of gives you a cue as to how to handle them and how, if anything else in this, the communication in the transaction is going to go. I mean, if they're already being defensive, right? Sometimes I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be rolling my eyes a lot in this transaction, but I'm still going to do my job, right? And I'm still going to keep asking. I just may be a little bit more friendlier. Although I don't think I was unfriendly the first time I asked. Right? So same thing with the title and escrow. If you're representing the seller, I never cared who was representing who. I always sent that contract to the escrow company. I didn't care. I didn't care who was opening it. I always did. I figured either, hey, I'm helping you out and I'm doing but at least I know that title and escrow, and in our state, most of the time it's the same person, got a copy of that. Right? And the same thing with my transaction coordinator, made sure she got a copy of it too. Awesome. So now we need to go back and ask ourselves, what's the first thing my seller needs? Okay, so, and it's different in every transaction, right? That's why the answers aren't up here for you guys, okay? So these are good questions for you to ask when you get into escrow, when you get that offer accepted. What do my sellers need to know or do? So not just what do they need, what do they need to know, and what do they need to do? So in our area, sellers for the most part have 7 days to get their disclosures to the buyer. That's their contractual obligation. So either I've collected them ahead of time when I got the listing, or right as soon as before I got an offer, I collected the seller disclosures. And if it's only been a few days, because sometimes things move pretty fast here, then I just got to watch that time frame and make sure I let them know. Right. And if I've sent them the disclosures and they haven't done anything with them, I'm not going to wait till day 6. Right. So that's one of those things that even though, so on your timeline, it would be your fault. I'm not letting go of my hands off the wheel. I'm going to keep, hey, I sent you the seller disclosures. Remember that they're due on, and in this case, got to look back at my calendar. They're going to be due July 1st. Right. So if it's this, if this contract was just accepted today, I'm hoping that my transaction coordinator is sending out the seller disclosures within the next 2 days. And if she's not, and I don't see it, I'm going to be talking to her about making sure she does that. Because my sellers usually take a couple days to do it. Because in California, that stack is pretty thick. Some of it's just signatures, but there's a couple of the TDS, the SPQ, those kind of things that's asking them questions. Was there a death on the property? Have you had an insurance claim? Do you share things in common with your neighbor? Do you know of any defects in the house? And then this too is where you're going to have to go and you're going to have to help navigate them through some of this. Because usually when you first go to the listing appointment and you're sitting at the table, they're telling you things. And if they talk to you about that roof repair that they did in the last 6 months, and then you see the seller disclosures come back and there's no mention of a roof repair in the last 6 months, you may want to call your seller back and say, hey, here on this section is where you would want to put that in. And they're like, oh, I just didn't want to say, or it's not a problem, I fixed it. And I'm like, you're right, you did. And let's just disclose that, right? Because for a buyer, it's location, location, location. For a seller, it's disclose, disclose, disclose. Ain't going to hurt you if you disclose it. It will hurt you if you do not, right? Can you see a bigger problem if you don't than if you do? Well, he might cancel. That's okay. Trust me to be able to do my job. I'm a good negotiator, right? And I'm going to be able to present it in a way that that buyer will accept, okay? And if he doesn't, we'll get another buyer just like we did this one. Right? So that's a part of your job, right? You have to ease that seller into what's their anxiety. Oh my God, the sky is falling always for everything, all the time. Okay, what's my job? Is to constantly bring them back to what's normal. Do you know it's so normal for people to put that stuff in there? And then sometimes I'll go into things of some of the big things that seller sold a house and they disclosed to a buyer and the buyer bought it anyways. Like, really is okay. So these are the kind of things I want you to think about what to do to bulletproof the transaction, okay? So now we're looking back at our seller's timeline, which is just above the bottom one, right? So for a seller in these timelines, you're going to have for one is if I'm representing the seller, whose job is it to see that the earnest money deposit is in escrow?
The agents.
Yep, which one?
The buyer.
Buyer agent.
Yeah. So if I'm representing a seller and we're on day 5 and the earnest money deposit has not been turned into escrow, do I have any responsibility to find out what's going on?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So it absolutely is on the buyer's agent to explain how to get the money to escrow, where to send the money, the timeline, all that kind of stuff. But if it's not happening and I'm representing the seller, it's 100% on me to follow through and check up with it. So what I normally do is I reach out to escrow and I CC on the email the buyer's agent, hey, can you let us know when the buyer's earnest money comes in? And usually most escrow companies, the ones we work with, are pretty good. But things can happen. They can forget stuff, right? And then it could have been turned in and they're, oh yeah, I forgot. So sorry about that. We just got real busy. It was Friday. It was end of month, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no problem. But it's up to me as a listing agent to watch out for that. Okay, same thing like we talked about, that the seller's disclosures are due, but they haven't filled them out yet now. And I have to remind them, hey, you have a contractual obligation to get to them at day 7. And usually that'll say, when I say the word contractual obligation, it kind of has a bit more significance than just saying, hey, you need to do that. You haven't done it yet. Can you do it? Yeah, I need to do it. Keep in mind, you have a contractual obligation to have it turned in by, and I need to know what date it is, by the 1st. Do you think you'll be able to do that? Oh yeah, I'll get my husband to fill that out. He's the one that has all the receipts for all that stuff. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Right? So that's me bulletproofing my transaction because I never want it to be my fault while there's something wrong. Okay. So the other thing too is when we have, let's just say the buyer has some inspections done and they send us the reports. If you're a buyer's agent, send them to the agent. Now, keep in mind, I do that for 2 reasons. If I'm representing the buyer, sorry, because I'm bouncing back and forth between a buyer and a seller's agent. But if I'm wearing the hat and being a buyer's agent, as soon as I get those reports, especially if they're bad, I send them to the listing agent. Because I know that if he gets a copy of it, now it's a material fact associated with that home. If I never send it and I just tell him about all the terrible things, that agent has a responsibility to say why, but it's not the same as a material fact. Wouldn't you agree? Right? If a roof report comes back that it needs to be replaced and it's $30,000, I send that to the agent right away saying, hey, here's some of the stuff we're dealing with. And it's also my way to kind of ease them into, I'm still gathering reports. I'm still doing this. No, yeah, I'm sure the buyer's going to ask for something. I don't know when. So now I've got my seller's hat on and I just got a report back that the roof has $30,000. The roofers came back with a $30,000 repair, probably a replacement on it. So I'm going to let my seller know right away. I'm going to give them a heads up. And just so you guys know, you think anybody's ever going to receive that news well? They're probably going to go, oh, thank you, Sherry. You sent me this report for $30,000. It usually sounds more like, what? Who's that roofer? Oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or they want to, they're just going to be kind of upset. And I'm like, have to talk them off the ledge again, right? Hey, they're not asking for anything yet. They're just letting us know I'm already doing my job. Remember, I talked to you about how I'm, a negotiating expert, and then I'm going to be walking through this. They may ask for the full thing, but I'm looking for other options. Maybe we may want to have our own inspection. If you think that that is so far off and that there's nothing wrong with your pretty little roof, right? Then maybe we might want to have our own to combat it, because I have a professional person saying that the roof has $30,000 worth of repair, and they're not going to take my word for it or your word that that's not the case. Right? So you guys can understand and see how some of that, whether you're sending contractor information back or forth, you're going to have conversations around it. That's the other thing I want to point out. Please don't do that with texting. I mean, if you could liken it to, and I know that I'm really reaching here, but if you went to the doctor because you were sick and he had some bad news to deliver it to you, wouldn't you be so glad that he sent it in a text? You have cancer, stage 4. See you on Monday. I mean, it really wouldn't sit well, would it? I mean, imagine that, like it really wouldn't. So I want you, and yes, I know that I'm reaching here. But it's the same thing. If you have some reports like that, sending it in an email is fine, and sending a text to say, I want to talk to you about this because I can, I want to be able to explain this. Maybe the person doesn't pick up the phone, and maybe you're busy and you want to make sure you send it to them so that they've gotten it and you don't forget. Right. So, but whatever it is you can do, please follow up with that phone call. Right. To me, I think that's just one of those, courtesy. That's how I want to do my business. I don't want to just throw stuff out there and have them say, well, figure it out. Right. I have a stronger duty to that, to my client. And then too, like I said, you're making friends, right? And it's not just one transaction. I want it to be a transaction or a client for life. I want their mother, their brother. I actually want Aunt Betty, the one that's been complaining and the whole way and sabotaging and doing whatever. I want their whole family, warts and all, right? Wouldn't you? You know, and if they're really bad, I'm not talking about people who are like terrible. I got a few people in my delete pile, right, that I will never work with again. I'm not talking about somebody that's abusive or is just irate or I'm not, you know, mental. I'm not talking about those people. But when I get a client, you know, I like being mother hen. I want to help with them and everybody that they know. So we're dealing with the seller again. So we want to go back to what are some interaction points? What are some of the common interaction points? How are we going to communicate the deadlines? I have a template that I send on every escrow. I created it and now I save the template. And every time I open an escrow, I go in and fill out the dates. I actually have my transaction coordinator do it. She fills out the dates and she sends it to escrow. She sends it to the buyer's agent and she sends it later on. There's a different email template that she sends to my client. Now, the reason I'm sending it to escrow and to the buyer's agent is to make sure we're all on the same page, that they're not counting the 4th of July as a day that one of those deadlines might fall in. Right. And that's pretty common. So I want to communicate that to make sure that we're all on the same page moving forward. And so I tell my agents, like, if you're a new agent, don't be lazy and rely on that other person to send you that. And then just go, okay, well, they sent me the timeline. It must be right. Right. None of that stops our fiduciary responsibility to our client to know our timelines and to count those days out for ourselves and to know how to count them out, whether it's a business day or a calendar day, and if it falls on a holiday, a Saturday, a Sunday, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So create it once, right? And now you just have that, I copy and paste it. I actually gave that to my transaction coordinator. I said, this is what I want you to say. You know, and if I've refined it over the years. In 20 years, I'm not sending the same one that I sent 20 years ago. Things have changed. So, but it still has the basic premise of the timelines and an introduction. Okay. So, another thing is not only do you want to send your contract to your title company, but if they're going to ever communicate with your client, you want to make sure that they have their contact information. So I want you to be aware of the fact that you don't just send things. I had one agent that just they created an email chain and it had escrow, had title, had the lender, it had the buyer's agent, it had anybody and everybody on there. And they would just blanket send every email to everybody. And I'm thinking, well, if you just sent my client's contact information to the buyer's agent, how happy do you think I was about that? They just gave my competitors, my client's personal information. Like, you wouldn't want to do that, right? But that's an important email to send to your title company. They may need to contact the clients when they come in for the signing, right? And they're going to set that appointment. I want to give them their email address and their phone numbers and tell them their preferred way to communicate, which brings up another item. That's one of the things early in my career, I just assumed everybody would want to have a phone call. Then later it went to everybody wants to text. Now I learned, I ask. When I'm meeting with my client and establishing that relationship, that's one of the early questions I ask them is, what's your preferred communication? And then too, if there's two people, and usually there's more than not, there's two people in a transaction. So I ask the two people, who's the preferred person? Do you want me to do both? I've had some where I've had the mother, the husband, the wife. There was like 4 or 5 people that they wanted me communicating with. I've had one where 4 or 5 people were on a contract and I had to tell them multiple times over and over again. That was a little harder, but I was going to do it every single time because my duty was to each and every single one of them, not just one as a whole. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So now we're talking about the document standpoints. Is this active communication? Is this an act of communication or a document? In other words, are they sending you just information for information, or is it a document that you need to keep and pass on or have your client look at? Okay. To whom and from whom is this document going? Am I the end person? Which means I'm usually not, because then that's going to go to my client, the seller. Or do I have to get my seller to sign it and then, like if the lender's sending me something, like for a VA loan where the buyer and the seller have to acknowledge the pest or the NPMA 33 form, they're gonna sign that and then send back. Did the lender want, so I have to get my client to sign it and send it back. What's the best pathway for communication, right? Rarely are you gonna send a document over text, right? And do you have electronic signatures? Do you, whatever it is, those are things you're gonna wanna start to look at and start to plan for it. So that when you do get an escrow, right, you're not having to think of that then. That's not when you want to learn it now, right, before you get there. So that like early on in the conversation, we talked about, you know, how the dots started connecting? Start hearing about how these dots connect so that when you get there, you can make those connections that you won't forget. Okay. Another thing is, what is the plan for follow-up? After a document has been sent to the other party, is there a response that you're waiting for? Do you need an acknowledgement or not? Okay, and then the other thing is, are there templates that I can use, especially if I'm doing something like Gary Keller says, if you're doing something consistently in each transaction, you want to get a template for that. That's a way to be able to duplicate yourself and add extra time to your day. And who doesn't want more time to their day? So now if we look at this timeline for a seller, we're still looking at the same timelines, right? Whether it's an earnest money deposit, the inspections, the walkthrough, we want to look at who do we need to be communicating with? If we're on day of a 30-day escrow, let's just say we're going here through to the walkthrough, and it is July the 23rd, and the buyer hasn't done their walkthrough yet. Right? Is that when you want to be following up with it? Or do you want to have a system to where you're saying, okay, on about July the 20th, about 4 days before we close, or maybe July 19th, I want to have something in my calendar that says, follow up with the buyer's agent for the walkthrough. But remember, it's going to be 123 First Street, follow up with the BA walkthrough. Right? So you can have that on your calendar. And then you could be looking, are they, so you can, if the date comes up, your calendar shows you, hey, you had an alert for that, that's great. And then you could just move right on if they've got it scheduled. But if they haven't, then you may want to send a quick text to the agent. Hey, when does your buyer plan on doing the walkthrough? Because remember, if you're doing multiple things at once, don't be surprised that you're not going to forget these things. I mean, as hard as you want to work and as much as you want to do, it's easy to forget some of these things. So set your system up so that you have them in a calendar them. At least write them out somewhere and have them on a board. Another thing that we can do with Keller Williams, which is a great opportunity for us, is to put things into command. And so we do put our opportunities into command, and you can have a lot of these time frames set up. If you are in command and you love command, you like looking here, use it. It's a great tool to be able to use to send you or keep an eye on the timeframes. Whew, I've talked a lot. Are there any aha moments? Anything coming together?
I like the thought of making a template for things that you do recurringly.
A timeline is a big one. So imagine this. I have two, okay, and it's called a seller's intro escrow and a buyer's intro escrow. And it says on there, congratulations, and then I just type in so-and-so on getting your offers accepted, right? You know, here's some things we're going to be working on. You know, if it's a seller's, we're going to want to make sure that your disclosures are sent. We've got 7 days. Below is a time frame of some of the important dates that we will be watching over. If you have any questions, let me know. And then I actually have another section right after that that they never read, but at least I sent it to them, that talks about some of the common things. Like they say, if I've repeated it a couple times, like in our state for a closing, first the buyer's loan docs come out, then they get reviewed, then the loan funds, then it can record. So it's usually a 2 to 3 day process. In other states, you go in, you meet the attorney, and the buyers get their keys. That is amazing. I wish we could do that, but you know, California does complicate things. So that's one of the things I have to reiterate to people is when the buyer gets their loan docs and they're signing, it's usually a 2 to 3 day process. I'm saying that a lot, right? So usually I'll say that in the beginning. And then 2, just think about it. When it closes, when's the seller going to get their money? Because it records, when does the seller get their money? So a lot of times I'll be explaining to them, let's just say this escrow closed on July the 3rd and it got recorded late in the day. Let's just say it didn't get recording confirmation till like 4 o'clock on July the 3rd. I'm going to be communicating to my seller that, hey, chances are escrow is not going to be able to balance that out and release those funds until the next business day that they're open. They're not going to be open on the 4th, so you're not going to get your funds till the 5th. So I'm going to keep my hands on that transaction. So come the 5th, July the 5th, I'm going to be calling escrow, hey, be balanced out when you think you're going to be sending the seller their funds, because you think they're going to be wondering and you don't want to leave them out there in the dark, right? So on that timeline, if I send them a timeline in the beginning, I can kind of remind them, hey, remember when I talked about that the closing was going to be on the 3rd? They may not balance out right away. And you might not get your funds till the 5th, right? So don't plan your trip if you're going to be using the funds for this on the 4th, because you won't have them. Does that make sense? Hope so. One last thing is, this is a piece of advice I wanted to give you guys, okay? And this is something that I say all the time, and it is true no matter what. I can guarantee it. So what I tell every buyer that when we get into contract, they're so excited. Of course, it's like, congratulations, you know, either we worked hard and, you know, maybe this was the 3rd or 4th offer we wrote and they got beat out before and they got it accepted. I'm like, you know, congratulations. And I'm going to prepare them for the timeline of what inspections you want to have and, you know, really be working closely with your lender. They're going to be at the beginning of the escrow. You're going to have a lot of stuff to do. And at the end of the escrow, right? So in the beginning, really be watching your emails and your texts from the lender. And if you have any questions, if you need my help, let me know. If they're asking you to copy a bunch of stuff or scan stuff, let me know. I've got a great scanner here at the office, get it taken care of. Don't go to Kinko's, come to me, right? So I'm telling them all that kind of stuff. And then I say, you know, I just wanted to let you know, something's going to happen. I can't tell you what it is, but something's going to happen during the course of this escrow. It always does. Never fails. Something always happens. And then their eyes get real big and they're like, what? Like what, Sherry? What? And I'm like, I don't know, but I can tell you it's going to. Now, just think about this. People buy and sell homes all the time successfully, even though something always happens. So keep that in mind. When it happens, we'll be talking about this. Okay. Something that could happen is, like I've had it happen before, you get all the way down to the end, your lender needs to verify your employment. And the person in HR went on vacation and they won't be back for a week. And we're supposed to close before that's out. And that's going to stress everybody out. So that's something that's going to happen, but we'll look how can we overcome that? If they're closing right around tax time, a lot of times, if people are supposed to have their tax returns and it hasn't, if it's been filed with the IRS, but there's a delay in getting it received, that it's been received, sometimes that can cause a delay. All kinds of things can happen. And it's just something that I can tell you that we can most of the time we can overcome it. So just be prepared for it, right? And so what my mom would always say, because my mom was in real estate too, and she would always say, Sherry, prepare them for the bump, right? Because they're going to hit a bump along the road. And if you prepare them for the bump ahead of time, it's like a little seat belt that will keep them on the ride until it comes to a full and complete stop. If you don't prepare them, they're going to fly out all over the place and whatever, and you may not even get to retain them as a client. But if you can prepare them for that bump, then they're more likely to like, oh, it's a bump, and that's all it is. Or they'll be stressed, and I'll just remind them, look, remember, lots of people buy and sell homes and they have issues just like this. Let's just give me a chance. Like, let's just see what we can do. I never let go easily, right? And now if you don't want this home, I'm certainly not going to push you into a home you don't want. But if you do, let's see what we can do. Let's see what solution we can come up with. Does that make sense? Do you guys think that you can remember that? That you're going to prepare your buyer for the bump. There's always going to be one. Okay. Sometimes it is a bump that you cannot mitigate past. And I have to say, doing this 20 years, I've had a few cancellations. Now, way more success to the close, but I've had a few come down to the last day where a buyer didn't let escrow know that he was married. And in California, it's a community property state. And if you're going to buy property, you have to have your spouse sign off that they have no claim or right to it. Or no lender is going to lend to you because that other person has a right or claim to that title. So, and the lender wants to be that first person. And so my client had already moved out into their home that they were purchasing. That person had moved out into the home that they were purchasing. So it was just like this domino effect. We were on the bottom rung, and that buyer, the day before we were supposed to close, found out that he's married and his wife is refusing to sign off. And so I called her, found her phone number and called her and begged her, please, you don't understand. It's not, they were getting a divorce. I said, it's not about him. You know, you can say he's a jerk, he's a whatever you want to call him. But I was advocating for my client and for the clients that already moved out. And she said, no, Sherry, you don't understand. I don't want him living anywhere near my children, and I will not. And I thought, can't argue with that. So I had to call my client back. Guess what? Answer's no, it's not going to go through. And so if we had more time, I would go into more of how we did, how we actually were able to save everything. My clients got a bridge loan. They were able to move. The other people were able to move, and I was able to sell their home. It gave us some time to actually sell their home and get it done. But let me tell you, that was pretty stressful. That was one of the hard conversations I'd had. So not every time will you have a successful all the way to the close. But if you do a lot of the things that we've talked about and that we've put into practice, you're going to mitigate. Number one, if you do half the stuff we talked about here, if you're asking yourself those really good questions that were on some of these slides, you're going to mitigate half the problems you're going to have later on, right? You're going to be communicating with lenders. You're going to be communicating with appraisers, right? And asking people, hey, do you have this? Do you need my help? Is there a problem with this? Somebody dropped the ball? Right? Doing those kind of things. Okay. So you want to clearly communicate and often with everybody, every step along the way. You're going to set realistic expectations. The other thing is that you're going to maintain your professionalism throughout. And that's another one of the things every time I've ever created a team or worked with any agent that I'm coaching, I always tell them, it's your business, right? You're a business owner. It gets to have your ethics. It gets to have you decide what it is. Do you want it to be a business of a hothead? Do you want it to be a business of a reactionary? Do you want to have that reputation? So I told my team, no matter how upset they got, and let me tell you, sometimes agents can be butts. No matter how upset they got, I told them, I said, look, we want to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. The thermometer goes up and down with the temperature, right? And I'm not talking about when you're talking to your client and handling difficult people, if you mirror and match. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who constantly escalates and escalates and escalates. You don't have to be there. Maintain the temperature, and you get to choose that. If you like it at a cool 78 degrees, stay at a cool 78 degrees and maintain your professionalism. And don't let anyone take that from you, not because they're a hothead, right? Or not because they're like huddled over in the corner and shivering, right? You maintain your professionalism. That's what you get to control, right? So no matter if you're dealing with a difficult person, whether the difficult person is your own client or somebody from the other side, maintain your professionalism throughout. And I guarantee you will go a long ways, right? Always doing the right thing. Hope that helped. So another way to avoid risk is to be proactive, right? You want to keep looking at your timeline. If you're getting close to the dates, see if you can, like they say, shoot one over the bow. Just send a little email reminder to the agent. It's always nicer when it comes over, hey, your buyer's contingency time is up tomorrow. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. You think you'll be able to meet that timeline? And they're either gonna come back, no, you know what, we couldn't get an inspector out in this time, and I'm gonna have to ask for an extension. Just want to prepare you. Well, you're telling me the day before, what happened? So now communications open up and you're digging in and trying to find out what happened. Where is the deal at risk of falling apart? And what are the best practices to keep it alive? One of the best practices we talked about quite a few times is keeping your hands on the wheel at all times and never just assuming because it's not your responsibility. It doesn't mean you let go of the communication or finding out or inspecting or investigating further, right? So fiduciary is to always act in your client's best interest, even when it seems to conflict with your own. Like if there is a $30,000 roof report that we got, you have to be able to explain that to the client, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, even though you don't want to give it to them. Well, I can't say you wouldn't want to give it to them because you want to give it to them. So any ahas from any of that? Almost done.
Can't wait to go through my first transaction.
There you go. Do you feel more prepared, Amy?
Yes. However, at the same time, I feel like, how do you say it? Like unprepared in the sense that I don't have a template, and hopefully somebody who like my coach has one that I can use, because I don't want to necessarily rely on my own, first time to build my own template. But
Yep.
yeah, it kind of goes both ways. Like feel more confident, but also hope that I'm getting the right information to build the template.
That's one of the great things I love about Keller Williams is most agents are willing to come from abundance. They're willing to share, right? And your coach is a great place to go. Ask them, do they have a timeline template that they use, or help you to find one? And don't be afraid to ask. I've shared mine, I don't know how many times. And I don't have any kind of audacity to think I've got the greatest, right? Like I'm looking at it thinking, oh man, I could make it look prettier. I could make it look clear. I could do this and that, but you know what? It works. So
Yeah, I get that.
happy to
Would you be
share with
willing
you.
to share it with us?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank
I'll
you.
have to see how I'm going to be able to do that because I'm not so tech savvy.
Well, thank you anyway for trying at least.
Yep, yep. No, I will. I'll see if I can somehow set it up that it's because I have one set up for a buyer and one set up for a seller.
Perfect.
That
Cool.
would be great. Thank you.
Yes.
You know what? I'm thinking I am sharing my screen, aren't I? You guys gonna
Yeah,
bear
we
with
could-
me for a minute? If
We could take a
couple of-
screenshot.
Yeah. Let's see.
I know here in Colorado, we use CTM is one of our contract companies, and I know some of our people use DocuSign, but we have a feature in CTM that'll actually create the deadline calendar for you. So it plugs in all of your deadlines, and I find that super helpful.
Yeah, it's one of
my-
those things I say when I get anything that's automatic like that,
Mhm.
like you know when they say stuff rolls downhill,
Yeah.
and if there's a mistake, who's going to pay for that? Even if you've relied on the best technology. So I always double check it. So it's great if they have that to be able to fill that out, but there's not, go in and check and make sure that those dates are right. Because once in a while, something will happen. And then it's like, I never want to have like mud on my face I'm
Right.
really want to do a great job for my clients, right?
It populates directly from the contract.
Right.
Ms.
Well,
Sherry,
yeah.
you can share it, you can share it in the chat.
I don't think I'm savvy enough and I can't find it right now.
Sherry, if you copy the link and you just
Mhm.
post it onto the chat, it'll be on there.
Okay. I'm trying to find it. There it is. Nope, new listing. Oh. So my daughter's my TC too, and she could tell me right away where she's put it.
Do you get access to our emails when we sign in? Because you might be able just to email it out like
I don't
tomorrow.
think so.
Hmm.
Here it is.
Technology.
I know. Here it comes. I found it at least. It's just going to take a minute to open now. That's what it looks like. So you can see up here at the top, I have hello, right? It's just congratulations. And then I have the contract dates and the escrow information because I want my client to know where they're going when they're going to do their signing. And then down at the bottom, this is the thing that I have just copied and pasted and stolen and kind of reiterated for things, some important things to remember. And the stuff below the table is stuff they don't read, but it's a good thing. At least I can say, well, refer back to. And let's go back into, if I have an A personality, A type personality, they read everything, even when you think they don't. They love reading. They're like me. You can't over communicate. So there's that one. Okay, now I'm going to look at. So here's my seller's timeline. Looks almost exactly the same, huh? So the only thing that's really changed in it is some of the stuff down here at the bottom. As far as like seller's disclosures or getting the offer accepted. And so it's basically the same thing. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
So.
Yes, thank
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. But then too, you guys, I highly suggest talk to your coach about that, right? Like ask them, because man, you'd be surprised. Like I'm almost embarrassed to say it was like I had been in business almost 15 years when I was talking with one of the agents I had originally trained, right? And she started out as my receptionist and she just went on to be like this great agent. She was in the NAR's 30 under 30, like just a phenomenal agent. And then later on, I went back a couple of years after she'd worked with me and we kind of worked with each other a little bit to kind of like refine some of her systems. And like, I got to have some of the ones she created. She got to go back over some of the ones that I had, and we kind of got to go back through it again. And she's the one that had created the form on the client's preferred communication. And I have it now in all my listing packets, and I want to know their name. I want to know their birth date because I want to send them a card. Where before it was always harder for me to ask them, what's your birth date? Because I felt like I was a drill sergeant. And because I'm a D personality, sometimes I come across that way. So I'm looking for ways that I can find out what I need to know and still be friendly and personable, right? Because sometimes I'll just get task oriented and I'm just going down my list. So asking them some of those questions kind of made me come out of my shell of, okay, don't just keep grilling them. Ask them and now I'm asking them questions, and questions as far as what do they prefer instead of what's this. Do you understand the difference between those two? So it just kind of helped me. One of those great things. So don't be afraid to talk to other agents, even some of the highly productive agents. Okay. Just to be honest with you, I love it when people ask me. I had one today and I'm thinking, oh, you chose to ask me, like I'm honored. And I'm a know-it-all. I want to know it all. And if I don't know it, I'm going to find out. So right, for me, it's mutually beneficial, right? But if I could help you, oh my gosh, you just made my day. Okay, one last thing we're going to go through in 15 minutes now. Okay, we're going to go through this part pretty fast. So the other part is obviously you want to have repeat and referral business, correct? Yes, of course you do. I know you're all going, yes, I do. So you want to take take advantage of the opportunities that you're going to have when you're in a transaction. Okay, don't wait for it to close. So when are you going to ask for referrals? I know, my gosh, I've really been hitting this home with the agents that I'm coaching right now. Because on my team, they learn that you say all the time, anytime you get a compliment, I would call on one of you that are on here, but I won't. I'm going to be nice and say, what do I always teach you to say? And that is, somebody gives you a compliment. Oh, Sherry, thank you so much. I'm glad you thought of that. I say, you know what, you're welcome. You know what, I work really hard to make sure that you have like a stellar experience. Like, I want to work so hard for you that you can't help but refer me 3 of your friends. It's one of the best compliments I can get. And so then we just move right on along. And then later on, they'll say, Sherry, oh, they'll get any kind of compliment, you know. Oh my gosh, thank you for explaining all that to me. You know what? I love doing this, you know, and you're certainly welcome. You know, remember, my goal is to make you so happy that you can't help but refer me 3 of your friends. Right? It's one of the greatest compliments I can receive. And I mean it sincerely, right? And then later on, because I've heard it so much, sometimes I'll look at them and say, remember, my ultimate goal, I know, Sherry, and I'm going to refer 3 of your friends. That's right. And I'll sometimes I'm like, can I get a high five? You know, I'll act silly because I'm kind of dorky sometimes, and I'm okay with that. And I just put that into it. So it came from attending with Brian Buffini, who talks about referral business. I love his systems. I love Brian Buffini. So when I look at what he said and how he said that, asking for referrals, it was never at the close on the closing table or when you're handing them the keys. It was always, because where is your greatest source of referrals going to come from? And let me tell you, I've been doing this 20 years. I could stop, and I'm not bragging, okay? I could stop lead generating and I would still get business, wouldn't you think? I got a lot of clients in my database. I have a lot of happy clients. I got 2 just a little bit ago, and I haven't talked to those people for a while. You know, and they referred me a family member, and one was a coworker. You know, of course I call, because I'm training them the whole time. Hey, remember, I'm looking to make you so happy that you can't help but refer me 3 of your friends. I use the word 3. When I was working on my team, we bumped it up to 10 and I didn't get them. So we brought it back down to 3. And oh my gosh, almost every single time they would send me 3 of their friends. I would get 3 of their friends. It was a miracle that it worked like that. So please use that. Remember, my goal is to make you so happy you can't help but to refer me 3 of your friends. It's one of the ultimate compliments I can get. By the way, I really like working with you. Okay. So ask for the referral. And hey, here's a thought. You're calendaring all your other stuff. Put it on your calendar that you're going to ask that referral. And if they're not giving you a compliment, you can say, because some people don't, you can say, hey, how am I doing so far? And listen, what are they going to say? You know, what are they saying? Listen to what they're saying. It's a good question to ask. How am I doing so far? How are you doing in this? I know, remember when we said it was one of the most stressful things you can go through? Right? Well, now you know what I meant. Okay. Because tell me, sometimes when I see husbands and wife buying a home, don't be surprised if when you pack everything up, you think, hey, it'd be real easy for you to go your way and I'll go mine. We're all packed up. Okay. So don't be surprised if you have that conversation at least once, because it's stressful, right? Even for the best of marriages. And it's kind of like letting the air out of a hot balloon. Like, oh, how'd she know we just had that fight? It's because I've been doing this a while, because I bought my own houses, because I had that conversation. Okay, so the next thing is to look at, you want to look at future opportunities, right? Repeat, referrals, wash, rinse, repeat, just like shampoo. So you want to look at asking your client for referrals. Anybody that you're working with, say your tradespeople, the pest people, roof people, any of those, constantly be looking at things of ways that you can lead gen, build your business, look for referrals, ask for referrals, don't be afraid. This is where, and I think it was Jay that talked about this, of what do investors want in their return? If an investor is going to invest $100,000 in a property, do they expect $100,000 back? Answer is no, they don't. They want it magnified, right? There's a percentage they want it back. So when you're doing activities, think of it. And the way I explained it is 1 + 1 does not equal 2, right? You don't want an equal return on your investment. You want more. So if you're already in a transaction, be looking at ways that you can talk to people and magnify your 1 + 1, 1 + 3 is going to equal 50. Right? That's how you can magnify things. You're already doing it. You're already there. The opportunity is just there for you to push past whatever fear or insecurity, anything you have, because everything you want is on that other side. Any ahas with that? Not one. Okay, so now we're talking about the post follow-up. So now we've closed the transaction. Yay! Big round of applause. We got paid. The buyer got their home, the seller sold their home, and we got paid. Yay. So now we want to look at following up with the co-listing or whoever they call it the co-agent. So basically it was the buyer's agent or whoever you were not, follow up with them. If you had a good transaction, it's one that you may want to talk to them. Talk to them about Keller Williams. Maybe they might be interested in some of the things that you might have talked about Keller Williams, some of the benefits, the coach that you have, the resources that are available, the Y4T2, where it's win-win and how you learn that kind of stuff. Because let me tell you, no company teaches agents like Keller Williams does. I've worked for a few. I had my own brokerage and I came back to Keller Williams because of all the things that they give to new agents. And I wanted to start to give back. And I love the systems that they teach their agents. It works. It works. That's the magic pixie dust that I think that there actually is. If you do half the stuff that's out there in Keller Williams, you can't help but be successful. Now, sitting back and complaining or saying shoulda, woulda, coulda, or maybe someday if I have this or if I get to that, then I'll be able to do it. One of the Keller things is the bold laws is to be that agent. Yes, you'll grow and yes, you'll expand, but be that agent. Be. That's one that's been hitting me lately. I've been in it 20 years, right? And I'm still learning those laws. Be, do, have. Not first I have it, then I'll be it. It's the other way around. Okay. So if you can't, going back to the other screen before I ask for ahas on that one, if you're not comfortable, like maybe you had a great transaction with another agent and you kind of do it, which is great. I mean, it's awesome to network and to build that kind of real estate agents. It's a smaller community. And when you can get to know other agents, even those from other offices, right? If you're ever putting an offer on another, like when I go show properties where I know that listing agent, it's more enjoyable. And when I get into escrow, like I'm rooting for, oh my gosh, I hope the buyer likes that because, I really like working with Susie Dunning, or, I really like working with Myra Flores. Like I love doing that kind of stuff. So it's like, and so building that and having that great kind of a connection, don't minimize that kind of stuff because the same thing happens. Let me tell you, I have gotten offers accepted when right after COVID, when there was multiple offers going out there, because I had relationships, and this is what helped when I was president. I knew a lot of agents because I spoke a lot during that year and they knew me. Sometimes I'd go up to them and they'd go, oh, hey, Sherry. And I'd be like, gosh, I don't remember you, but that's okay. But if I developed an even further relationship with them, like some that I really know, because Lodi is a small town where I'm at, there was 5 offers on a home. They all got to a certain price point. They weren't going any higher. They all had everything. They were 5 offers exactly the same. And you know what won out? My offer did, because I communicated well. I called them and let them know what was coming. I sent them the email. I presented it. I made it as clean as possible. I didn't send it in 50 different attachments. It was all in one. And I talked to the agent several times, right? And they knew me. So when they went to their seller and they outlined it out, they're like, here's this offer, this offer, this offer, this offer. Hey, they're exactly the same. You can pick a card, and pick the luck of the draw, or I can tell you this agent is from out of the area and doesn't know a lot of stuff. This agent I've worked with before, and let me tell you, they were difficult and hard. And don't think those agents aren't tattling on each other like that when they're sitting down there. I certainly know when I get one from one of those agents, right? Like I know it. I'm like, oh my gosh. But I mean, if it's a good, you're going to work with them no matter what. But man, if I have a choice and I can tell the seller, like, this one's going to make our transaction nothing but difficult and hard. And then there's this other agent that I know that I've known for years, you know, and is highly ethical. And I don't have to keep double checking or worrying about things. Like, you know, I would recommend this offer. And here's why. Now the seller's going to make their choice. So definitely network, right? And even if you're a new agent, don't think that I have had offers where there's multiple offers where, again, there are level platforms and there was brand new agents and I knew their coach, not the agent, compared to somebody who, like I said, was from out of the area, and some that I thought, man, they just need a different profession, you know? So if all things are considered equal, it's those little things that can help to get you over that hump to get your client's offer accepted, right? So, and again, if you are known for being a thermostat and not a thermometer, that no matter what's going on, that you can maintain your professionalism, that's really going to help in your career will go far, right? It'll go a long way. At least can't you see how that would benefit you and your clients? Say yes, it will. Okay, so
Yes,
that
it
is,
will.
yes. So now, as we're at the end of this, we're not going to go through the daily success system, right? So we've got about 7 minutes left. If y'all want to go and spend time with your family, I will not be offended. Love you, wish you the best, right? And that you're certainly welcome to call, text, email me. I'm happy to help in any way, shape, or form. I always say you can't outgive God. So I figure, hey, if I can help you, I'm very happy to do it. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. But now if you've got anything else you want to ask me, more than welcome to. And if not, you're welcome just to leave too, okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Yep.
I like the fact you said control your temperature.
Yeah.
Take you a long way. Sometimes it's better not to say certain things. Just keep moving. I like that. Thank you.
So let me tell you, go a little bit further since you brought that up, okay? And I just expressed this to a friend of mine because I do have a little bit of psychology running around in here. Bye. So I was telling a friend of mine who's headed into a family dynamic where there's a person that is crazy and they always go off. And so I told her, okay, you know, you're going into this. Her sister's in the hospital, right? It's a life and death situation. One, you know, there's a lot going on in it. And she's concerned that when she gets there, this one family member that's going to go off is just going to go off. She's not going to be able to handle herself. And so I talked to her about being the thermostat, not the thermometer. You're the stronger one, be even killed. And I said, you know what's going to help? I said, you know, people talk about the studies where you do the Wonder Woman pose. You can do that. And the other thing I said, take a breath. Because when they're, especially if somebody's being, now I'm talking about the extreme, right? Somebody's being really bad. Okay. Or if you get put on the spot, this works too, right? This is to a lesser degree of the same thing I'm talking about. Take a breath. And don't be afraid to take that second. You don't have to do that, right? But just don't be afraid to take a breath. And then I told her, look up. And I said, look up. Look up. I usually look up and over to the left, and I'm collecting my thoughts. Now, just to let you know what's going on in your brain is when you come into a situation like that, where you're starting to get on that overload, only one side of your brain's working. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. They've proven this, right? With probes on people's brain, one side of the brain works. So you're trying to think clearly. You ever feel like that? Like you can't think clearly? Or man, I wish I would have reacted this way or responded like this. It's because you're only dealing with half the pistons. So if you stop, take a breath and look up, it gives your brain a chance to go over to the other hemisphere. Now you have better recall. Now you are more yourself. Now you can respond. Okay. One side of the brain, react, 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 react. How dare they? Blah, 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 blah. All that kind of crap comes up, right? But if you take a breath, look up, give yourself a second, brain comes over to the other hemisphere. Now you're firing on all pistons. And I guarantee you will respond, not react. And that's how you can be the thermostat. And let me tell you, there's been lots of times when I've been talking to my clients, even some of the best of my clients, because they're going through a trying time, they're going to be trying, right? There's been times when I've had to put my phone down. And then now look up, and then I'll pick the phone back up, and they're still going on. So then I'll just get back on the phone, and then, but I'm in a much better place to respond than if I just keep going down the rabbit hole where they are. Right? So that's to me, you know, living by, it's tough. You have to use a lot of self-discipline to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. Okay, so I hope that helps you guys.
Thank you. That was very good.
Yeah, and I'm still recording this. So now we have real estate, successful close, and now we have some psychology. Oh, any other
Thank you.
questions? No. Well, I really wish all of you the best. I can't wait for your first escrow. I hope I've given you some things to help navigate that people stay on the ride till it comes to a full, complete stop. The buyer gets what they want and you get paid. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
right, bye,
Appreciate it. Bye.
bye.